But it's time now for MediaWatch, and James Creedon is here to tell us what has been making a splash online. Good to see you, James.
Hello.
And here in France, a lot of reaction, obviously, to Emmanuel Macron's statement last night, the unveiling of a series of fiscal measures designed to quell the Gilet Jaunes protests.
That's right. So I suppose he would have been hoping that that this would end it for this Saturday, the 5th Saturday in a row, when there is going to be protests, because it looks pretty likely that there is going to be. Let's take a look at this cartoon to kick things off. This is Emmanuel Jaunes, a cartoonist, and this was kind of being shared on Gilet Jaunes Facebook pages today. So has it calmed down? And it's kind of depicting him in a nuclear bunker, basically. Indeed, he didn't communicate for about a week ahead of last night's TV address to the nation. In any case, trying to kind of, this seems to be a freeze.
This was before he came out last night and gave us this pre-recorded 13-minute long statement.
That's right.
Which he said, "You are all I care about. I will fight for you."
Exactly.
And there are a lot of polls out today, aren't there, saying that only half of French people were convinced by those measures.
That's right. We're trying to.
So he perhaps would have been hoping that it would have been more, but only half. So we don't know if the protests are going to continue. That's the upshot of it all.
We're back in action
you're
again.
back
Sorry
online.
about that.
Really good.
Now, in any case, we did see that it didn't stop them from gathering at various points around the country today. The Gilets Jaunes, they were out in force, along with lycéens who were reproducing or what would you say, acting out this gesture where they were down on their knees with their hands. A reconstruction.
What happened in Montjoly.
Exactly, which got a lot of criticism for what was seen as heavy-handed police tactics and humiliating police tactics. This was last week, when at the beginning, when high school students started to kind of row in behind the other protesters. So what we saw today was a lot of lycéens, high school students across the streets around France. This is in Boulevard Saint-Germain, near the Education Ministry, joining in. So just by way of saying...
Did you see what Ségolène Royal had to say about it?
About the lycéen students?
The students having to go on their knees.
She thought it was great, didn't she?
She said, "All right, well,
it'll teach them a lesson." She had a military upbringing, I think, so maybe she's more understanding for this kind of stuff. In any case, on Facebook we saw too little, too late, after too much violence and too much spitefulness. So these were the sort of messages going up online. In other words, it just didn't convince people. Now, some were kind of wondering why it... Well, actually, just speaking of police violence, there has been a lot of talk about that as well. The fact that stun grenades are used, and one person lost a hand, another person lost an eye.
In Paris?
So, well, I think the person who lost an eye, it was in Bordeaux. And in Paris, yes, it was somebody who lost the hand. I think it was in the Paris area.
Because of a stun grenade?
Because of police use of either flash balls or a stun grenade, indeed.
Right.
So in any case, the thing is, I think one of them picked up this grenade and threw it back at the police, and at that point, it kind of went off in his hand.
Ouch.
So, a
lot of people were injured, weren't they?
They were.
A lot of police officers were also injured.
A lot of police officers injured as well, and so people kind of making reference to that. In any case, that is what some people feel the measures that were announced. It's going beyond just simple measures and money being thrown at the demonstrators. They feel angry at the way it's been managed, angry at the time it's taken for the government to come up with these gestures. So what they're talking about here is an Act 5 of the resistance. And if you scroll further down, you can see people talking about check and mate. These are all Facebook pages organising the Gilets Jaunes protest. Facebook really has been the social media that they've been using most often. And some also annoyed at his announcement that the minimum wage would be raised by €100, because in fact, if you get into the technicalities of it, it's not the minimum wage that's being raised. It's a household where you have two people on the minimum wage get a bonus of €100 a month, which means it's not quite the same thing
as a per hourly.
Right. So some people felt that they were kind of being that was sort of manipulatively explained.
Figuring out the maths today, yeah.
That's right. Now, and what a lot of people are calling for now, remember, it started off as a fuel tax, and then it's kind of morphed into all sorts of other demands, big long list of demands, and now a lot of people are calling for a referendum. A citizen referendum that would help sort of decide on, well, a whole range of requests. One would be whether Emmanuel Macron would stay on as president.
What you wish for. We see how referendums go.
I know, this is true. Referendum is perhaps not always working out very well. But if you do want referendums to kind of decide on issues of policy, apparently in Hungary, you just need 200,000 people to sign a petition. In Italy, it's 500,000 people. Obviously, in Switzerland, it's used very, very regularly. Whereas in France, you would, at the moment, need a massive amount of people to sign. I think it's something like 4.3 million. So a lot of what they're saying here is that this would be a means of trying to, the Gilets Jaunes, for now, quite a disparate group. It would be a means of getting their take on the various different questions.
All right. And people around the world, of course, have been watching what's been happening in France with absolute fascination. I mean, how quickly political disputes go to the streets.
Right.
We've seen it so many times here in France.
That's right.
I mean, this was different, but...
That's right. And to kind of sum it all up, because there's a lot of articles I've been reading about this. This is one by Simon Jenkins in The Guardian. France's political crises are always played out in riots. And what he says is...
Unlike Britain's.
Right. Well, if you look at the history of things in Britain, it's usually things kind of get resolved in Parliament at some point. After much wrangling.
It's very rowdy in Parliament.
Right. It gets extremely red. Maces being held aloft and all that kind of stuff. But in France... oftentimes because the parliament is weaker and the president kind of gets to decide on a lot. So if you don't agree with the presidential line, take to the streets. That has been kind of, I mean, well before the Fifth Republic. This is going back to the 19th century as well, way back. And in any case, a lot of people, there's been various articles as well saying that giving money in this particular instance is just simply not going to resolve the problem. The problem is kind of basically a problem with how the exercise of power and authority, and in the Fifth Republic, that is problematic since Charles de Gaulle, who was the last president to exercise it effectively.
Time for a new republic?
Well, that's what some would say.
A lot of bread metaphors today.
Yes.
Crumbs or a loaf of bread.
And boulangeries.
We want the whole baguette. I mean,
this one is good, right? I saw this on Facebook earlier, how different countries resolve their problems. And there is this perception now, I'm not sure if we can see this at the bottom of the screen, I'm going to have to minimize it. But in France, I'm not sure we can see it, unfortunately, but it's all mayhem there at the bottom.
I want to talk about Egypt.
Yes.
Because they've banned, this is a good one, they've banned the sale of yellow vests because they don't want any Gilet Jaunes copycats.
Can you believe that?
They've had their revolution, they do not want another one.
And it's coming up to the anniversary as well of their of the Arab Spring in Egypt, the 2011 uprising, of course, which they don't really want commemorated. And so an order has been given not to sell yellow vest, kind of construction vest, to people just coming in off the street. That's been an order handed down by the police. We saw in
It's
Iraq...
a shame, because they're pretty useful.
They are pretty useful.
If you're a road worker.
Right. I think they're going to allow it if it's kind of, if it's sales of, what would you say, wholesale.
Oh, right, okay.
Iraq, you had people wearing yellow vests in Basra. I found this online. Remove Trudeau from power. The time is now. So there has been a sort of a little bit of a kind of
a global movement.
Well, that's what some people.
Nicolas Sarkozy.
Yes,
had dinner with Emmanuel Macron, really?
On Friday, and it was all off the. It was not official. It was secret, etc. This is Friday, the day before the fourth Saturday of protests.
Macron wanted advice, or Sarkozy wanted to
possibly, and he had apparently said over the weekend, "I might be obliged to come back to political life," which he since denied. But he did apparently have a dinner with Emmanuel Macron secretly on Friday night. I suppose what has been happening, certainly we can see, is that Emmanuel Macron, the Jupiterian line is gone now, and he really is trying to reach out for advice about how to manage, I suppose, what is seen as a decades-long rift between the powers that be in France and the public, which he now is having to kind of manage.
Yeah.
It's perhaps
what goes around comes around. Okay, James, thank you very much indeed. James Frieden there with some analysis of what is happening here in France. Now,